Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. We recap both series as they open the season on the road. As the injuries mount, we dive into the status of the rotation, what's wrong with the offense, and what lies ahead. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Joe, we kick things off with the week that was. Listen, we're not oblivious. We're not stupid. We always tell everybody we are pretty rational, even-keeled Mets fans. We don't get too high when things are great. We don't get too low when things are down in the dumpster. And as we record this podcast, after the Mets were walked off in Milwaukee, swept by the Brewers on the road, I have full awareness that it's code red, full panic, alarm, and amongst Met fans, the team is 3-4 before they play their home opener against the Marlins. So, Joe, I don't really have to ask you how you're doing. I just want everybody to know that we will be honest today. We will be as rational as we can, but we are here for a little therapy to kind of dial back and tell everybody that the season's not over before May.
If you know me, it's no shtick. It's no thing. I am probably the least emotional on a day-to-day basis with baseball.
It's a long season.
Pretty much everyone I know. And sometimes I get ripped for it. But I'm going to say this about this Milwaukee series. Can we not stay in haunted hotels? Like the Mets are staying in that Feister hotel or however you say that. And it's like, oh, yeah, they're staying at this allegedly haunted hotel. I don't know what was in the air. Milwaukee was hitting like the 27 Yankees or something. And just there was no way to get them out. Just obviously a terrible series in Milwaukee, fresh off 3 out of 4 in Miami. And it just shows how baseball is for the fans. They won 3 out of 4 in Miami. That might as well have happened in June of last year because the focus is squarely on this 3-game series in Miami where the offense and pitching, the pitching didn't show up for any of the games. The offense showed up for one of the 3 games. So obviously a really tough stretch. And I think the Mets are probably ready to hop on that plane and get back to New York.
Yeah, get to play a home game, number one, which matters a lot. It's a long time to open like this on the road and with no rest at all, no days off. And listen, we're not here to make excuses about the Mets. The Mets are a team that they're built to win on pitching right now. And the offense should not be this lackluster. But at the end of the day, we know when the Mets go on winning stretches, it's going to be on the backs of their starting rotation, a pretty deep bullpen, and of course playing defense and playing contact-centric baseball in terms of offense. And you're right, Joe. I mean, let's just start right with the rotation and start at the top of Max Scherzer. And, full caveat, Justin Verlander is not healthy right now, and Verlander is going to be a huge part of this team. But with Scherzer, there's no way around that the start to his season has been disappointing. He was cruising in Miami, and then he ran into that 6th inning trouble. He still gave the Mets 6 innings, 3 earned runs. If that's a quality start in baseball. That's games that you should win. Was not the case in Milwaukee when he got hit really hard in less than 6 innings, 5 earned runs. Here's the one for me, Joe, the 3 home runs. So the Mets, to go on these long stretches, to get back to winning over 90 games, they needed Max Scherzer to be the bulldog and the head of this rotation. And it's been a little bit of a slow, rusty start for Max.
They definitely need Max to be the ace. He's not locating his stuff. The velocity isn't really a big concern to me. I mean, if you watch most of his starts, he's typically 93 and 94, and he gets it up to 95 to 96 when kind of he needs to. So I don't think there's a velocity concern with Max, but he's just not locating. And if there is one thing, even when Max was winning Cy Young after Cy Young, the one kind of thing you could have always poked at with Max was giving up home runs. Yep. That's kind of always been a part of this game. Yeah, he's aggressive, but I'll say this, it hasn't looked great the first 2 starts. There's no way around it. Like you said, Connor, Miami, cruising, looked like ace Max Scherzer, then gave up the couple hits and the home run in the 6th to Garrett Cooper. But 6 innings, 3 runs, like that's fine. The Milwaukee outing, he didn't have it. Everything was middle, belt high. When you're throwing 93 to 95 or 93 and 94 or whatever, belt high, middle is going to get hit. So he didn't locate well at all in Milwaukee. With that said, he's Max Scherzer. I have no reason to think Max Scherzer is done or cooked, or I expect him to pitch like an ace. And if he doesn't, we're obviously going to have to continue to visit this throughout the season. You know, there's 155 games left. So there's plenty of,
Is that a lot?
There's plenty of Max Scherzer starts still to come. And there's nothing from a stuff perspective that I see that makes me think he's just falling off the cliff completely. But until he goes and has one of those vintage Max Scherzer starts, reasonably, people are going to question it.
Yeah, that's how. And listen, in this sky is falling after getting swept, everything is going to be on the table in terms of what's getting poked at. And if you should rely on anything, it's the known, right? We know Max Scherzer is a really good pitcher at this age. This isn't really where I'm sounding the alarm, and we will get to things that are much more concerning in this rotation. Before we do, we actually move to one of the most optimistic sides, and that has to be Kodai Senga, Joe. And unlike every Mets pitcher that seemed to get into trouble later in the start, Senga was a guy that ran into significant woes in the first inning and then was essentially untouchable in 5.1 innings with 8 strikeouts. He only gave up 3 hits, considering how tough that first inning was. Senga with the ghost pitch. And I'll say this, Joe, the most important thing to me, like, I know Senga has good stuff, and I know Senga can locate his stuff. The fact that he can deal with adversity in that kind of moment, your first major league start, the adrenaline's pumping, you got to bounce back, you got to get back in the game to get your team back in the game. That mental makeup of Senga to me was a huge sign.
I thought Senga had a fantastic debut. First inning, first start in a new country, everything that kind of comes with that. Understandably, he was nervous. He said after the game that his feet felt like ghosts. So he was certainly very nervous going into that start. And after he finally worked his way out, 36 pitches, I believe it was in the first inning, he ended up making it through 5 1/3. And his pitch count on average was like 9 to 12 per inning, basically after that. So he really turned it on. And that ghost fork is absolutely the real deal. I did not get to see much of Senga in spring training because most of his starts were on the road, and I'm not paying to watch spring training
with the
games.
Weird camera you get to see,
with the
like
weird camera too. Yeah, like I basically lived through highlights, so this was like my first true full length look at him. And I mean, the metrics on it were crazy, like 1,000 RPMs, which when you think of sliders and curveballs and fastballs, you want more RPMs. With the splitter, you actually want to, or the ghost fork, you actually want to reduce the RPM. So he was down to 1,000. He was getting on one of the strikeouts, I believe, of Jacob Stallings, it was 38 inches of vertical break, which 12, 24, 36, that's like 3 feet and 2 inches of break. So the pitch is legit.
The way that drops, it's amazing to watch.
Yeah. And he made guys look foolish throwing the bat. One got thrown at him, one got thrown into foul territory, up to 99. It was more, 94 to 97, but he did hit 99 a couple times. So the velocity's there. Even showed his cutter a little bit, curveball. I think Kodai Senga's first start is just a big kind of 2 thumbs up. Maybe that's partially in relation to how the rest of the rotation is pitched. But to me, I was very happy with Senga and how he started off his Mets career.
You have to be, and it'll be exciting to watch him pitch at Citi Field and definitely instill some confidence in you. And, that kind of brings us to more of a dip now. And that hard conversation is Carlos Carrasco, because Carrasco, to me, unlike having the confidence in Max because of his ability to locate and the stuff is fine, Senga, who already showed the ability to work out of a jam and was tremendous after that, there's no way around it, Joe. And I don't think it's an overreaction, even though it's only one start. Carrasco throws 4 innings. He's hit really hard. He gives up 5 runs on 4 hits, 4 walks. He really couldn't put people away. hard contact. The velo significantly down, Joe, a couple ticks, not just a mile per hour here or a mile per hour there. Carrasco, not a lot of life on the fastball. I think for the Mets, I mean, it has to be concerning in the sense already of if this is who Carrasco is right now, that the stuff is starting to diminish. There's going to be a world where there's a conversation of, okay, how long can we live this way because he can't go deep into games or taxing our bullpen? Is there some point of the year where the rotation looks like Scherzer, Verlander, Senga, Peterson, Megill? And we'll get to both of those guys in a second. But I found out of all the things to react to, and I'm pretty level-headed right now, it's a long baseball season. The Mets were bad in Milwaukee. What do you want me to say? Like, they looked lifeless in the first two games. They fought pretty hard against one of the best pitchers in baseball, against Corbin Burns, but they didn't get much shutdown pitching on their side of the game that led to the sweep, the walk-off sweep. Carrasco is the one thing I'll react to here, Joe. He didn't look like he had anything to open this season, and that's a scary trend if it continues.
Yeah, I'm going to take a bit of a wait-and-see approach on Carrasco.
Yeah, it's one start, but still.
Yeah, it is one start, but the velocity is of high concern to me. Typically, you don't see stark velocity dips without something being awry, whether that's a dead arm or some kind of injury. But after the game, the Mets and Buck and Carlos himself said he was fine. I know the pitch clock seemingly has messed with him, maybe more than anyone else on the Mets staff. He had multiple violations for the pitch clock. He seemed kind of uncomfortable.
That's what jumped out to me.
So maybe the adjustment has kind of screwed everything up for him. But hey, guess what? That's the rules. So you got to figure it out. So I'm very interested to see Carrasco's next start, to look at the velocity. Because like you said, the results weren't great, but the results weren't good for really anybody in this series. So I'm looking ahead to what his next start is. Can we see that velocity get back to normal? Hopefully, obviously, a little better performance in addition to. And, you know, the more times he pitches with the pitch clock, you would like to think he would get more comfortable. But he's just got to figure that out because it's part of the game. It's going nowhere. So you have to find a way to get your pitches off in time. And you can't have worrying about the clock impact your stuff, your velocity, and your overall performance. So he's got to figure it out. There's definitely more questions with Carrasco than anybody else in this rotation right now. And he has a lot to answer to.
And someone else that undeniably has been really disappointing out of the gate, especially how great he was in the spring, how underrated he was last year, is David Peterson. And Peterson, when you look at the line against Miami, the 5 innings and 1 earned run, and it was just on a home run, you go, okay, we can live with that. When you look at the fact that he gave up 8 hits in 5 innings and walked someone, Peterson has this habit of getting himself into severe trouble. And there's going to be days where he works out of it and gives you 5 or 6 innings and you survive in the game. And then, Joe, there's days like the final game against Milwaukee where he gives you 4 innings because he gives up 5 hits, 5 earned runs, a home run, and he walks 5 guys. 5 hits, 5 walks in 4 innings. I mean, there's just no way around it. I said to you, as soon as we got on today, off the air, I thought he should have got hammered today. I couldn't believe the Mets were even in that game. Credit to the offense keeping them in it against a great pitcher in Corbin Burns. When he left the game and gave up 5 earned runs, or I think when he had come out, it felt like the Brewers should have scored 12. The ball, he was hanging sliders. I think Keith said it on the broadcast. He was hanging the breaking pitch. He could not locate the fastball. He didn't look comfortable. I was actually surprised he got through 4 innings. It kind of looked like to me after the 3rd inning, like, hey, if you want to win this game today, that guy can't go back out there. I'm a big Peterson fan. You and I, picked him to have a big year. There's no reason to think he can't bounce back from this. But, man, the habit of constantly putting ducks on the pond and already, kind of tying one arm behind your back in these situations is not a way this guy can live if he wants to be a successful mid to back end rotation pitcher for Peterson, and it has to improve.
You can't certainly get in that habit. And when you think about spring training, his problem was walks. He didn't give up any hits basically in spring training. He might have given up 0 or maybe 1 hit in all of spring training, but he walked 8 guys in 12 innings. So the walks are a problem. He needs to figure out keeping guys off the base paths there, because in a general sense, like today in Milwaukee wasn't great. There's no way around. Like you said, he should have given up way more than he did. But in a way, credit to him. He did this last year as well. He shows an innate ability to work out of tough situations. The Miami start, I thought was good. Like, I didn't have a huge problem with a lot of what happened in Miami. A little more hits than you'd like, but I thought he handled that start pretty well. Milwaukee wasn't so good. He's got to refine his mechanics a little bit, I think. One thing that they changed this year was they sped up his arm a little bit in his delivery, which they believed would lead to more consistent control. Because when he was really slow, sometimes the arm speed was inconsistent, which led to the ball kind of going all over the place. So the speed up was kind of intended to help his control. In the early going, maybe hasn't been so successful, but his stuff looks good. I mean, he's up to 96, hung some sliders today. That's unfortunately going to happen. Like, you're not going to every start have your crisp stuff. And Peterson's someone that I don't have a high level of concern with, but obviously with the offense actually showing up in the third game in Miami, it stinks that the pitching did not. But that's baseball, Susan. That's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, that's how it goes. And, full transparency, if this series was in June and the team was completely fine right now, you become frustrated by it, but you go, hey, you're going to run into everything's not working at once in a stretch here or there. And I think we were spoiled because last year, really all the way to September, that didn't happen. Like, the Mets didn't lose back-to-back games. Even when the offense wasn't a powerhouse, they would string together runs, and the pitching was consistently really, really good. And of course, you have Edwin Diaz on the back end to just be this lights out force that they're going to be without this year. That's the reality of sports. You lose guys to injuries, and you can cry over the spilled milk, or you could actually try to contend. So for the Mets in that spot, it's frustrating that this was the second series of the year, and that's why it's so magnified. And, it kind of brings me to our last pitcher here who will start the home opener. He will start his first 2 games of the year against Miami. The one he started at Miami, Tylor Megill, 5 innings, 2 earned runs, gave up a home run, struck out 7. I mean, Megill was solid, Joe. And I think with Megill, what you like is that he seemed to be able to locate his stuff pretty well. And I mean, it's just fascinating to me how much I wouldn't say struggled. Megill was average in the spring. I think that's fair to say. And Peterson was well above average. And then everything starts firing during the regular season, and you see Peterson's struggles kind of kick in right away, while Megill seemed to be a steady Eddie. And now Megill finds himself in a situation where, listen, this is April baseball. You don't panic over everything, but you'd really like the Mets to come out and win their home opener behind Megill, get back to 500, 4-4 to start the season, and be like, okay, we're over the sweep. We're fine. Calm down the fan base a little bit. Calm down. The questions in the clubhouse right away are going to be crazy. And Megill kind of needs to be a little bit of a stopper. I hate to use that term in April, Joe, but it feels like they need another, replication of that start against Miami. 5-6 innings, 2 to 3 earned runs.
I'd almost argue Megill was doing too much tinkering this spring. He obviously lost a bunch of weight. I think it was 15 pounds or so that he lost in the offseason, which oddly enough, losing weight as a pitcher sometimes throws your pitching mechanics off because you're used to a certain weight. So I think that's a factor. He was working on a new slider grip. He worked with Max Scherzer, actually, and Scherzer kind of told him, you don't need to throw so hard. You don't need to pitch as a starter like you're pitching as a reliever. Like last year, opening day, we remember seeing 99 on the gun, and I didn't know Tylor Megill had that in him. Now he's dialing it back and using the stuff, the higher velocities when he needs to. So I think he's developing into more of a pitcher than a thrower. And it was a good first start, like you said. And I expect him to be just fine. He'll have his ups and downs. He's a back end starter for him. I think he, like I said, maybe was just doing too much in spring training. And, now that the lights are on, maybe he's gotten accustomed to his new body, maybe got a little more comfortable with that slider grip, and now knows how he wants to operate from a velocity standpoint. And that helps too. When you're not going full bore every pitch, you have the ability to more consistently put the ball where you'd like it to be. So I think the arrow's looking up for Tylor Megill, And, we'll see, like you said, how he does on the home opener. Hopefully get the Mets off the schneid, get them home, and kind of quell things a little bit after a terrible time in Milwaukee.
Well, and also just be home and get a little momentum behind your home crowd, right? I mean, it's tough out there when you're Milwaukee and someone's getting shelled and you have fireworks and lights going off. And you know what? Like, Milwaukee has a fun ballpark environment. I thought the haze of the fireworks in the middle of the game is definitely interesting, to say the least. But
don't let them hit 100 home runs, and they
there you
won't
go.
keep setting
That's
off fireworks.
Fair. I think, though, that means a little something when you hit the walk-off home run. Like the final game, when you walk it off, go crazy and still do the slide all the time. In the middle of the game, it's like, okay, like we're in, I don't know, April baseball, man. Like, maybe you and I are just, our adrenaline is down a little bit right now. I just find it a little wild. But like you said, Joe, if you don't like it, stop it. That's kind of a mantra that we often live by on this podcast. Let's get into the offense as we rounded out the rotation. That, it's going to need Justin Verlander back after the All-Star break, hopefully, or whenever it is. They need Jose Quintana back. I mean, they need more arms, and they're really stretched right now in terms of the usage of the depth. So that's going to be something interesting to watch. But none of that matters if the offense doesn't perform. And until the final game against Milwaukee, the Mets essentially were playing baseball without getting anything from their two best offensive players in Pete Alonso and Francisco Lindor. And credit to both Pete and Lindor. They tried to carry the team in the final game. And they kind of remind you, like, these guys are stars. They're going to figure it out, and they're going to be fine. But, Joe, to me, the bigger conversation is that amount of weight on both of them to constantly be stars is a red flag to a lineup that Nimmo's going to get on base and Jeff McNeil is going to get his hits, right? And Starling Marte is a really good player. But the Mets, and it's such a small sample size, but is it when you go back to last year, when they get nothing out of Eduardo Escobar and Mark Canha and the catcher spot to an extent, it's a tough way to live for this team. And this is not an overreaction. This is a sample size going back to last year where I look at it and go, man, if the kids in the minors continue to hit, and I know Baty got banged up, but it's fortunately no structural damage on that thumb. He's going to be day-to-day, and we'll get a little even deeper into Baty during the mailbag. You just have to wonder, how long they live like this, because the Mets are going to win a lot of games because they do have star talent, and they do have talent from, let's call it 1 to 5, right? But you're not a great baseball team if you're getting almost nothing from 6 to 9 in a DH league, and the DH is so magnified. And Vogelback is fine. He's fine. But once again, it just, to me, Joe, comes down to those guys, Canha, Escobar. Catcher is what it is. But if Canha and Escobar cannot perform in any sense mildly consistently, that to me is like, okay, this is happening again. And it's very, very frustrating. And it's going to consistently keep the Mets out of games.
So this isn't going to be really popular, but I am significantly less concerned about the offense than I am the pitching. Obviously, the pitching has all the injuries, and we talked about the issues that Carrasco and Peterson and Scherzer are having, and they have 9 pitchers already on the injured list when you include even a guy like Jeff Brigham, who's on the AAA IL right now. Look, I understand getting shut out twice wasn't great. They scored 5, 6, and 5 in the 3 wins against Miami. They scored 6 today. You go back to last year. Yes, when we think back to last year, obviously it's the most recent thing, and it was the end of the season. They lost Starling Marte, and the offense kind of fell apart. That speaks to what you said about the overall depth of the lineup can at times be a problem. But there's so much out there right now that this offense stinks. This offense is not a playoff caliber offense. And the reality is it's the same offense as last year, just sub Omar Narvaez for James McCann.
That's an upgrade.
And largely throughout the season, that offense performed. They were second in the league in average. They were second in the league on base percentage. They were 6th in the league in OPS. Home runs was the problem.
Can they get the big hit?
And largely they did, right? They had 101 wins. So there's plenty of big hits in there. They lack a little power. That's something you and I have been talking about dating back
for 2
to the
years,
offseason.
Joe.
It's something we want them to add. And it's it's weird to me that they seem to be so against it, but I think this offense is going to produce plenty of runs. Is it an ideal offense? No. Is it everything I want to see? Definitely not. But imagine we think a couple months from now, or whenever that case may be, Eduardo Escobar, if he struggles for much longer and Brett Baty comes back and just keeps doing his thing, Brett Baty is going to be the Mets' third baseman by the end of this month. So I'm not incredibly worried, and they're already kind of loosely platooning Escobar. Guillorme has played the last couple games against right-handed pitching. So I think Escobar he's on the verge of losing that job. And when he loses that job, it's not going to be to Luis Guillorme on a full-time basis. It's going to be to Brett Baty, assuming he comes back and he's healthy and he's good. And now as we move forward, Francisco Alvarez off to a good start in AAA, has a couple home runs, a double, throwing base runners out. I believe I saw today 5 runners have tried, and he's thrown out 3. So he's thrown out more than I've stole on him. So you sub out that catcher black hole, which even like you said, maybe not be the biggest concern in the world. You're batting that person 9th, but you sub Francisco Alvarez potentially into that role. You sub Brett Baty into Eduardo Escobar's role. Magically, the offense looks deeper, more potent. So I think, Nimmo's going to be fine. Marte's going to be fine. Lindor and Alonso struggled up until today. They broke out in a big way. Magically, when your really good players perform, you score runs. Jeff McNeil, he's going to be just fine. I think Vogelback kind of is what he is. I want to see more of that power. He walked 3 times in the last game against Milwaukee, and I'm down for the on-base percentage. That's a good thing. But when right now the bottom of the order is not being very productive, it's difficult to say, yeah, Vogelback, take your walks, because now Mark Canha's coming up, who hasn't shown much. Escobar's shown essentially nothing, and then the catcher spot. So I think this is going to fix itself sort of throughout the season. I don't think it's a bad offense. I think it's a differently built team. And is that good? Is that bad? That is certainly subjective. I don't think there's one way to build it. With that said, they are missing that little bit of pop. And I think they are going to, unfortunately, by proxy of how everything is constructed, put a lot of that pressure on younger players here over the next month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it could be. But hey, the Braves did it, and Michael Harris came up and made such an impact. So I'm for it. I was about Brett Baty opening day. You, Connor, you were about Brett Baty for opening day. So I think that change is probably coming sooner than later. And that is a very, very long-winded way. And thank God there's no pitch clock on this episode of me saying I am weirdly not that concerned about the lineup. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of how I look at it.
Joe, you mentioned prospects. That reminds me, a quick note that Brooklyn Cyclones opening day is Friday, April 7th, of course, in Coney Island. A 1 p.m. game versus Jersey Shore, affiliate of the Philadelphia Phillies. Tickets start at $15. The Cyclones are featuring a Drinks on Us offer for $20. This includes 2 24-ounce beers with your ticket. For full details and tickets, visit brooklyncyclones.com. As we always do on this show, Joe, we go around the farm. Every week, it doesn't matter. We are going to talk about Baty until he's here, Alvarez until he's here, Mauricio, of course, Vientos as well. Let's get in a little deeper in that. Look at the Brooklyn system, Joe. Who do you have your eyes on for opening day of the Cyclone season?
Well, first off, I have my eye on the Drinks on Us. I think I got to make my way down to Coney Island because
they have the best deals. The Cyclones, always.
All about it. So the Cyclones have a really exciting team this year, and it's headlined by the Mets' first pick in the 2022 draft, catcher Kevin Parada, who is a unanimous top 100 prospect in baseball right now, and in some places a top 40 guy. Outfielder Alex Ramirez is also in the lineup there, and he's a guy that has now made his way into top 100 prospect lists across the sport. And he's someone I look at. I said it when we were at the Queens Baseball Convention, said it a couple other times on this show. I think he's someone that's going to have a big 2023 for Brooklyn. And this time next year, we're going to be talking about him maybe even as high as the top 30, 25 prospect in the sport. And on the pitching side, really excited to see what Blade Tidwell does. He was the Mets' second-round pick in the 2022 draft out of Tennessee. He was a guy that was this time last year when I was doing my draft study to get ready for the draft, Blade Tidwell was squarely on my mind for either pick 11 or pick 14 in the first round, where the Mets took Parada and Jet Williams. He had a little shoulder tendonitis that made him miss some time at Tennessee, and that led to him falling to the second round, where the Mets, in my opinion, stole him. So really excited to see him down at Brooklyn, and overall the Cyclones. It's a fun environment to go to, and there's some very exciting prospects I think you're going to want to check out there down at Coney Island.
So we went over the starting rotation, a lot going on there. We went to the offense, which I thought you made a lot of good points. Like, this is going to fall back to the middle of what it actually is. The bullpen, an interesting scenario to watch, because the Diaz injury, everybody's like, how are they going to utilize the bullpen? It feels like David Robertson is going to get a lot of the save chances. Of course, we saw his usage a little different in the final Milwaukee game, but that was not a save opportunity for Ottavino in the ninth inning. The game was tied. So, I mean, let's get into it real quickly, Joe. I think John Curtis, for the most part, has looked really, really good. Brooks Raley had the one really bad appearance against Milwaukee, but it wasn't overly concerning of like, this is who he is. Robertson has looked great, of course. Unfortunately, Tommy Hunter, back on the IL again with a pretty clearly career-affecting back injury. Like, this comes up for Tommy Hunter. It's really, really unfortunate for him. So the bullpen right now, it looked good against Miami, and then had some really rough appearances against Milwaukee. But at the end of the day, it just kind of shows, even with all the injuries the Mets have, there are arms that are ready to contribute in high leverage situations.
I think the bullpen's going to largely be okay, but you're going to have times like this, the Milwaukee series, where they've struggled. And a lot of that is due to the injuries. I mean, you look right now, the Mets have 9 pitchers, like I said earlier, on the injured list. A couple of those are starters, Verlander and Quintana, but a lot of them are relievers. I mean, Eliezer Hernandez is being looked at as a reliever. Montez de Oca had Tommy John surgery. He's out for the year. Sam Coonrod has a lat strain. He's going to be out for months. Steven Ridings has yet to pitch, so he opened on the injured list. Tommy Hunter, Connor, that you mentioned, he's on the IL now with back spasms, and Jeff Brigham is on the minor league IL. So when you look at the way this bullpen is right now, there is not a healthy reliever on the 40-man roster that is not with the big league team. So the Mets built up all this depth, and we talked about this in January and February, that they were deep in the bullpen. You can only be so deep. And there's a couple more guys, certainly, if they need to make call-ups. Eric Orzi has looked good so far in the early going for Syracuse. Grant Hartwig is a guy that's looked good for Syracuse. Denny Reyes came up just the other day, and he's going to be one of those names maybe that, we'll see how long he lasts here, but maybe he's one of those guys on a Sporkle quiz that confuses us down the road. But look, the bullpen's going to be a little inconsistent without Diaz, because like we said on the show here, everyone takes that step up in the role. But I think they have talent there with Robertson and Ottavino and Raley and Drew Smith. I think those guys are going to be fine. John Curtis, obviously, like you said, has looked good. The depth is going to be a problem. They cannot afford really any more injuries in the bullpen. So they need to stay healthy and just find a way to be a little more consistent. And I think they can. I don't think the bullpen's a significant issue. I think they just need to try to stay as consistent as possible.
Right. And when you look at, the rough games against Milwaukee, it just felt like the sky was falling everywhere for the Mets in that moment. It wasn't this high leverage situation. But of course, Ottavino giving up the walk-off in the last game is frustrating. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, guys are going to give up runs. These guys aren't going to be perfect. It's kind of scrapping together the back end of it right now. Drew Smith had the rough outing in the final game in Milwaukee, but I think what we've learned is Robertson completely equipped to handle closing duties. I think Curtis being back and healthy is a positive sign. And then time will ultimately tell on the rest of these guys. And most importantly, like you highlighted, Joe, a lot of it is going to come down to health. And hey, could some of these starters give some length in an outing so you're not running these guys into the ground? By the way, it's easy to pick on the guys due to recency bias that give up the runs at the end of the game. But when they have to come in the 5th inning and the 6th inning every single day, guys are going to get worn out. Guys are going to get tired. It's a really hard way to manage. So I could have a lot of problems and gripes on this show, and I think we have. I think we've been honest at times. Mine doesn't lie with the bullpen right now. Give these guys a chance, give these guys some rest at some point, and the starters have to be better, and we think they will be better. So before we get to the mailbag, a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. We're going to take a quick 15-second break and be right back on the other side with our mailbag.
This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Cadillac showroom today.
Welcome back. Time to get into your thoughts for our show here, our mailbag sections where you could yell and you're not yelling into the void. We're like it's like therapy, kind of, Joe. We're sitting here, we'll hear the thoughts and we'll give the feedback and how to handle a lot of questions. To be fair, this was a long open for us. We had a lot to address. We hadn't spoken to our audience since, the season hadn't even started yet. So we addressed a lot off the top, but got a couple good ones here, Joe. And let's start with this from Dylan, who asked, to be fair, Dylan asked this right before the final game in the Milwaukee series, but I think it's still relevant. What's been more surprising to you and Connor? Lack of offense so far, especially from Pete and Lindor, or the pitching performances from Carrasco and Scherzer?
Oh, to me, it's easily the pitching. I mean, I don't expect Max Scherzer to get shelled ever, essentially ever. So that was concerning. And then obviously we talked about Carrasco for a few minutes there. So for me, it's easily the pitching. I stated a very, very long case on the offense, why I'm maybe a little less concerned than others. And they've scored this year. We're on 6 games. Like I said, there's 150 whatever games left, 155 games left. So the offense will have its ups and downs, and they need to find more consistency. But the starting pitching is of much more concern in the early going than the offense for me.
So this one from Johnny, I like the wording of it because I agree. Johnny said, is it a bit of a bummer how the final roster decision has turned Escobar into a villain for some Mets fans? He's still a valuable MLB piece, and I feel if Baty was named the opening day third baseman, Escobar could have been seen as a Juan Uribe, Kelly Johnson role in one player for this team. I thought that was a really good take, Joe, right? Yes, Escobar's not performing. And when you don't perform in New York, you get booed. And Joe and I have a rule of thumb on this podcast. We never tell people how to fan. Don't be disrespectful. That's basically all we say. But if you want to go to the game and pay money for a ticket and boo, and that's all you do, then whatever. If you're very happy-go-lucky and positive when the team gets swept, it's your right to be a fan that way. We never tell you how to be a fan. I like how Johnny worded it. Basically, if Escobar didn't start out, let's be real, 6 for 12 with a home run snuck in there somewhere, this was going to be the response and conversation from the fans. And I'm not saying that's not warranted because this podcast screamed for Brett Baty to make the team. Our exact words are, what more did he have to do to make the team? There's clearly nothing he could do. But the sad side of that is Escobar, who performed at the end of last year when really no one else did in high-profile big spots, now is looked at a guy that all attention is on for the wrong reasons.
And Eduardo Escobar is probably one of the all-around best human beings that the Mets have under contract. Great teammate, great locker room presence. And the unfortunate reality is we talked about it. A lot of people talked about it on Twitter, talked about it on television, everything about giving Brett Baty the shot. By proxy, Brett Baty not getting that shot meant an extra level of pressure was put on Eduardo Escobar because now there was someone nipping at his heels for that job. And, last year that wasn't the case. He was a new guy and there wasn't another person that was like, if he struggles, we're ready to call up whoever. Baty wasn't at that point yet. He was really getting started in Double-A. So at this point, Baty was nipping at his heels in spring training. He was performing while Escobar was off not performing in the World Baseball Classic. Then Escobar comes back and doesn't perform in spring training and hasn't performed to start the season. So I think his clock is ticking, and Luis Guillorme playing for him is a telltale sign of that. But I do agree with the general sentiment of if Baty comes up and takes at minimum the at-bats against right-handed pitching. And Escobar maybe faces some left-handed pitching at third, maybe some at DH. He could play second. He could play left field a little bit. I think he's a valuable bench piece, much like the question said with, you think of Kelly Johnson, you think of Juan Uribe. I think Escobar fits in a mold like that. Unfortunately, Baty's emergence has sort of, in a way, turned the fan base against Eduardo Escobar.
It has. And once again, like, I'm not sitting here saying you can't boo Escobar or he's done no wrong. That's not, but in a vacuum, these roster decisions do have, repercussions and trickle effects and puts added I mean, we are 7 games into the baseball season, a baseball season that is over 160 games long. And aren't the Phillies like 1-5, by the way? And I'm not doing the look at them thing because I know the Braves are playing well. I mean, yes, they played well against the Cardinals, but they also got the Nationals as well. It's a long baseball season, and I think you can evaluate things that have a bigger sample size of a problem. And the sample size of a problem is we don't really think Eduardo Escobar should be the everyday third baseman of this team anymore, especially when a former first-round pick has been scorching through the minors now for a couple years, started off on a tear. I mean, it was excellent in spring, started off on a tear in the minor leagues this year. But that doesn't mean Escobar's this useless player. Everybody always goes, well, do you DFA him? And I'm like, what do you even mean right now? The Mets don't even have a right-handed DH, and they appear more motivated to play Escobar against lefties right now. We've seen him sit against righties, like you alluded to earlier, Joe. So it is frustrating when situations are created like that and magnified, and how the ripple effect it can have on the player. This next one from Jennifer, I really like, because this is something that I totally agree with and find fascinating. And Jennifer said, do you still think it's a good idea to bat McNeil 5th or 6th or 7th just because a lefty is pitching? He hits his usual single, and he may as well go back to the dugout because no one's batting him in. So this goes back to my original point of my concerns on offense. The 6th through 9 spot is a bit of a black hole at times for the Mets. And the batting champ of baseball batting right before those guys, I don't want to say renders him useless, but definitely doesn't maximize his ability. And listen, Buck, like we always say, Joe, Buck probably has forgotten more about baseball than we'll ever know. But maybe there needs to be a hard conversation at some point of, I'm a big hockey fan, and I watch coaches change lines all the time when teams are in a funk, just to get something going, try something different. And it's very early in the season, but I get Marte wants to bat in the same spot every day. I think Lindor is kind of like that as well. I don't know, Joe. I look at it and go, maybe you got to try something different. And I love Nimmo. I think Nimmo's a good leadoff man. He has not been the problem at any point of the offense in general. But I don't know if you could just keep batting McNeil down there and saying, yeah, it's fine. We like lengthening the lineup. Lengthening the lineup for what? The next guy to strike out or hit a double play? And that's the hard conversations that Buck is paid to handle, and I think he will. But I don't want to hear any more of this narrative. Marte wants to bat in the same spot every day, or you can't move Lindor or Pete around. Jeff McNeil is the batting champ, and you do not put the batting champ towards the back end of the lineup.
Jeff McNeil should never be out of the top 5 of the order. Like, if you want to bat him 5th, and I certainly understand the concerns you're saying, I'm okay with batting him 5th, but he cannot be batting 7th, should not be batting 6th. I don't care if it's a lefty on the mound. It doesn't matter. Jeff McNeil hits lefties. He hits righties. He gets on base versus both. Jeff McNeil should, without question, be in the top 5. I do think 1-2 Nimmo Marte is a near everyday thing. I don't think Brandon Nimmo provides nearly the same value in any other spot in the lineup. I think Marte is your prototypical 2-hitter. McNeil is too, obviously, but I think Marte fits really well there. The one thing that you could consider, I don't know if Lindor has the same thought as Marte does. I know you alluded to that, Connor, that maybe he does, but if not, maybe you consider flipping McNeil and Lindor, and you go Nimmo, Marte, McNeil. So it's contact, it's on base, contact, power, and then with Alonso and then Lindor. Yeah. And then you get to the back half and you have to figure it out. I think right now we're 7 games in. Maybe we don't need to make rash lineup changes. But if this is something that's going to happen over an extended period of time, you definitely need to look into changes. The only change that should happen right now is Jeff McNeil. His name should never be below the 5 spot in the lineup, no matter who's pitching, what the case may be. He should never, ever be out of the top 5.
Well, the reason why I'm particularly frustrated with this situation is I know we're trying to react to this year. When you look at McNeil last year, here we go. He batted 6th in 33 games, 7th in 19 games, 8th in 24 games. That's utterly insane, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and then if you want to look at it, okay, he batted 5th in 40 games and he batted 3rd 22 times. He barely ever batted 1st, 2nd, or 4th. So, and then you look at this year, what we've already seen in the small sample size is a little bit more of that, Joe, where he's batted 6th a couple of times. He's batted 7th to start a game. I don't know, man. I don't have the analytics and numbers. I don't have the analytics and numbers that the Mets have. But the eye test for me, and I do have numbers in front of me, like thank you, Baseball Reference. I could see how many times McNeil bats where and what his stats are. It's just, we agree. This is an offense that is not as bad as everybody thinks, but you also need to maximize the offense because it's far from perfect, and it's not even good right now. So I just thought that was an interesting conversation that it's something I would ask. I don't know if Buck would ever give you a real answer on that. Those are usually strategic decisions that you don't really get a lot of feedback on, but I would be a happier man if I saw a lineup that just had a little bit of a different flair.
In a way, simple old baseball, right? Where it's you want your best players to get the most at bats possible. So the lower you bat McNeil in the lineup, the less at bats and plate appearances you're giving him. So I think the top 5 should always, obviously people get days off and Buck's going to do that. And that's fine. I have no problem with obviously keeping people fresh, but in a day where you have your full assortment of players and no one's getting a day off, the top 5 should never have anybody but Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, and McNeil in it. You could move things around a little bit. Like I suggested, maybe you try flipping Lindor and McNeil. And I don't know if you move Lindor into that spot. He's not getting so many of the singles or the walks. He has a chance to do a little more damage before the bottom of the lineup. So yeah, I think it's a great conversation, a great question. I would love to get an off the record answer from Buck as to what exactly the thought process is there. But to me, I think it's completely wrong if he's ever outside the top 5.
And with that, I'm going to wrap up the mailbag right there. And Joe, as we sit here and record this podcast, it was just announced the Mets home opener on Thursday has been rained out. His team probably needs a day off. Okay. I don't even know if it's there's that much of a guarantee for it to be a downpour down here. The team could use a day off. We already saw, feels like Megill had trouble flying back early. Flight's delayed. He's going to end up taking the team charter anyway. The Mets need a day off. They were already scheduled for one on Friday. Now we will get the series going through straight through instead of the breakup in between. And I think that's a good time, Joe. Maybe everybody catch their breath, turn the vibes back a little bit more positive. I get it. If you're furious listening to this podcast and you're not going to be happy till they win 4 games in a row, that's your right. But listen, it's a long season. It's tough being a baseball fan if you react wildly series by series. And, on this podcast, we record once a week, so we react to every 2 series. And I always feels like that gives us a good cushion to go through the highs and lows because that's baseball. So with that, we will turn it over. And Joe, I will throw to you. This podcast is going to be able to breathe a little bit now before the home opener on Friday. Give me some closing thoughts, and please don't crush my dreams before we even get to May. We just got to April.
I was looking forward to being at the home opener, which I'm still going to go on Friday. So if you happen to see me, say hi. But I was looking forward. Thursday's weather looked like
almost 80.
Short sleeves and shorts on opening day in New York City. Like I was really excited. So I have to look. I know Friday there's no rain on coming Friday, Saturday. I don't know what the temperatures are looking like, but like you said, let's try to turn the page. Let's bring some positive vibes in the Citi Field when the players are getting announced. I know you talked earlier, Connor, about it's okay if you want to boo people. When they do the player introductions, let's support the Mets and realize that they're obviously trying their hardest, and we're only 7 games in. This is still a good baseball team. They need to stop having injuries and be a little more consistent. That's an undeniable fact, but I'm excited for the home opener. I can't wait to be at Citi Field, see the new scoreboard in person, because I haven't seen it yet in person. Check out some of the new, I should say check out the new food stuff, but we know I'm just going to get a hot dog.
You're getting a hot dog.
Yeah.
Don't fool the listeners. They know you.
I want to look at the new food. I'll walk by and I'll look at it and go, oh, wow, look at that. But I'm excited. And, it was a tough series in Milwaukee after a good series in Miami. When you think about this podcast, if we recorded this podcast on Monday, the vibe would be a little different. 3 out of 4 in Miami, things looking up. Disastrous series in Milwaukee changes kind of the tone and tenor. But I'm excited. You're excited. I think there's no reason to look at this team as, a lost year like some people are saying or anything like that. There's months and months left. So for everyone's mental and physical well-being, let's try to breathe a little bit each and every day. And, we're going to be here every week for you. So when things are good, you're going to love listening to this podcast, and we'll bring the positivity. And when things are bad, we're going to be with you on some of the negative stuff, but also try to rationalize some things for you and, maybe take just that smidge of emotion out of it. We're emotional as fans, but we also try to be rational at the same time.
Spin Zone Joe, how many years have we seen the Mets get off to a scorching start the first couple weeks of the season and completely fall apart? Maybe this is what they need. Maybe a little adversity early on to gather themselves, get hot, and start chasing back the division. So with that, we will wrap up today's show. This is the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This spring, be transformed during the Cadillac Move Up sales event. This is your moment to step out of the ordinary and into the extraordinary. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And a reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much, everybody. Be a little positive. Home opener's coming up. We'll catch you next week.